Good evening, everybody. KT here with Wise Images Photography, and today we are going to go ahead and talk about 5 common mistakes that photographers make. First up is not using a checklist. Back in the day when I was in my early 20s, I was shooting a lot of weddings and everything else, live events, lots of stuff like that. I don't do live events and weddings anymore. It's just really not my forte anymore. I'm much prefer shooting nature photography and headshots and graduations and branding kind of stuff. That's what I prefer shooting now. But when I was doing live events and I was doing other events and other types of sessions and stuff like that, I had a checklist, and it was really important to have that checklist because it just kind of reminded you of all the different things that you needed to have in your gear. And it's funny because all my bags had their set place. Everything had its set location inside the bag, and so I knew if something was missing. So as I got better, I kind of did deviate away from having a checklist of all the items that I needed, because I knew where everything was. So I had a little jingle in my head that I would go through, and if it wasn't in the bag, then I knew, because my jingle was my checklist, right? But what I have found now is that I am shooting, sometimes I'm going to be on the boat, or sometimes I'm going to be hiking, or sometimes I'm going to be photographing a human being in a park versus photographing a human being in a studio light setup. And so what I have found also with having video is that there's a whole list of all this stuff that I need to bring with video. So I would really strongly suggest go ahead, have a checklist so that way you don't forget things. I can't tell you, there's been times that I went on a photo shoot, guys, and I unfortunately forgot the cable, the TTL cable to be able to hook up my lights when I was running around on a session. So then I wasn't able to lift my flash higher to reduce the red eye, and I had to just kind of finagle around not having my cable. So there's been other times that you guys have seen me, I've gone out, and then all of a sudden maybe I forgot my lavalier mic, or maybe I forgot another microphone, and then we were having bad audio, right? So it's very important that you go ahead and set up a checklist. And actually that is what one of my tasks will be for myself, is to set up a checklist so that way I can review it. I do it for camping. Why wouldn't I do it for when I am going to go ahead and do some photography, right? When I'm going to go do video, make sure that I have everything that I need. So please make sure that you set up a checklist so that way you know what you need. Next up, kind of dealing with the same thing. It's not just about your gear, right? You also, let's say, for example, if you are doing a photo session with a human being, you want to have a checklist of what you want to go through and photograph. So like when I was doing weddings, this is when I used more of a checklist, was when I was doing the weddings, because when you got to that formal time, you would start out with the big group, and then you would go to the next group, and I had a whole checklist and a whole way of being able to make it as efficient as possible. So make sure that you have a checklist, whether that's for your gear to prepare you to go to the right place, or to make sure that you don't miss the shots that you want to get. Another common mistake that's made is not checking your settings before you go ahead and do your photo shoot. So whether your photo shoot is photographing a human, or it's photographing a bird, or even when you're in the field, and let's say, for example, you were stationary for a while, so you decided that you were shooting one particular way. You decided that, hey, I'm stationary, I'm not going to be going back and forth. I'm going to go ahead and set my ISOs to here. I'm going to set my aperture to here. I'm going to go ahead and set my shutter speed to here. And then all of a sudden, you change locations, and then you forget to go ahead, and maybe you're like going, okay, now I'm just walking around, so who knows which way I'm going to be shooting if a bird flies over. So maybe I need to go auto ISO at this point. And so if you don't check your settings to make sure you have your camera the way you want it for where you are, that's another common mistake that has happened. There have been times that I was I had been photographing birds. I had everything set at a higher ISO so that I could have a faster shutter speed so that I could get the birds. And then all of a sudden I was shooting in studio and I started photographing my client, and it was quite a few photos in, and I hate to even admit that, but it was quite a few photos in, and then I looked and I go, oh, I needed to like have a lower ISO setting for that. So make sure that you guys check your settings. Now the next one is not thinking through your shots. And where I'm going with this one, and it's hard because when you're first learning, you're trying to remember everything. You're trying to remember whether the weather is good enough, or what's going to happen when you're shooting in this condition or that condition, if it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's rainy, if it's snowing, whatever the conditions are. There's lots to think about with just the ambience of the scenario in the scene. But then you also have, what is your subject doing? Where is your subject? Is it a big subject? Is it a small subject? Is it a fast subject? Is it a slow subject? And then you got to think, okay, well, am I going to have a faster shutter speed? Am I going to have a slower shutter speed? Am I going to, am I going to open up the aperture really wide, or am I going to stop it down, or, whatever you want to do. With your camera. So there's so many different things that can happen, but if you take the time to, and this will come in time. If you're a beginning photographer, don't worry. This didn't come to me overnight, guys. This has been like years and years, and even to this day, I still tweak what I do. It's about understanding what that particular lens on your camera does. So start thinking about what you are wanting to be done with your shot. Like for example, the other day I was out at University of Florida and I was photographing a friend, and I know, and I can't share the images with you because she hasn't seen them yet, so I'm still in the process of editing them. But here's an example. When you are shooting humans, people look a little bit better when you're at 70 millimeters. So I was making sure that I was zooming in on that 70 millimeter mark, right? And then I was also stepping back a little bit so that way we had nice bokeh in the background. That's what I mean, kind of thinking about what it is you want to actually accomplish with that shot. So like if you're focused on a bird, you may not want to be right up to the bird, because then that means you might have to be on 150 millimeter. You may want more compression, so you're going to back up and then zoom into the bird, and then that way you get more compression, you get more bokeh behind the bird. So as you get better, as you start to improve and you start to understand what the lens does and what all your settings do, like I said, that common mistake is not, like kind of thinking through that shot. So I would like to encourage you guys to, even as you're learning, start thinking through the process of why you're doing what with your camera. Next up is not thinking about your composition, and basically having no regards for the background, having no regards for the fact that you're sticking your subject smack dab in the middle of the shot. Now, hey, putting items smack dab in the middle of the shot is okay. That is acceptable, because in the fact that if you're doing a shot that's very symmetrical, that makes sense. Let's say, for example, you want to isolate the subject. That makes sense. But I would like to encourage you to use the rule of thirds, to use leading lines, to use different compositional tips tips and tricks, and then not only just use maybe one, but use multiple of them, so that way you're kind of combining these photographs together and doing these tips, and then that way you're leading your viewer to exactly where you want the viewer's eye to go. And then it's also, when you think about compositional tips and tricks, it's not just what's in the picture, but what's not in the picture. So you want to make sure that you don't have anything distracting in the background, that you don't have any kind of distractions on the edges, that it's nice, super, and clean. Now, I will admit, one time I was on a wedding, and these folks do not want their images shared, so I will not share the image, but I got tickled pink because all the times, especially in wedding photos, right? They got to be clean and crisp and all this. And I remember we went to the top of this hotel, and I can't remember which hotel it was, but it was somewhere in the middle of Orlando. And they wanted a shot, and they were very particular. They actually wanted a crane, and they wanted all that construction mess in the back of their image. Of course, there was lots of bokeh going on, but I thought it was funny because I'm like, normally I was like looking at them and I'm like, are you sure you guys want this crane coming out of your head and over your head and everything else like that? And they were like, yes, it's great. This is fantastic. So, so normally you would want to get rid of maybe an object like that because a crane is very distracting. So think about what's happening when it comes to your background. So not only where are you putting your subject, but what's behind your subject too. All right, number 5, last but certainly not least, and this is something that I don't struggle so much with the one, but I do still struggle with the other one sometimes. Basically, it's not keeping your camera level. Now, obviously, you can always go ahead and go into post and then you can readjust, and that's absolutely a-okay. But remember that every time you adjust, you're gonna lose some of your image, which will affect your resolution, and depending on how much you've had to adjust it, depends on how much resolution you would lose. So that is one thing. So I would focus on trying to make sure you keep your pictures straight. Now, obviously, if you do want to tilt your subject, you can definitely tilt it, but you got to make sure that that's something that it looks obvious that you wanted that image tilted. Because sometimes it will really kind of confuse the mind if you have your item tilted. Now, this next bit, and I still do this next one, you guys. Sometimes what will happen is when I am photographing, I don't know why I do this, and I don't know if everybody else, I think this is a common mistake that people do, is either they'll do one of these numbers or they're really too far to the left, or either their subject is really far to the right. And, you know, it's like you might want the rule of thirds, which is about right here, right? But you don't want to be like cutting people off. So one of the things that I would suggest is when you are framing everything up, before you take that last little snap, let's move me back into position here. That right before you go to click is kind of look through your viewfinder and see if you are maybe having the subject way too far to the right or to the left. And this is my right, and that's probably opposite for you guys, and this is my left, so my apologies if it seems a little off there. But make sure that you have your subject where you want them. Another one, I'm just gonna throw this one in as a bonus for you guys. Don't cut off like body parts. I tend to do that sometimes. Like, I think that in my head, like I didn't fully think through the shot, and so I'm taking a picture and I'm doing the shot, and then all of a sudden I go, oh, you didn't look all the way around. I'm like, you cut off the bird's foot. Or like in the instances when you're shooting when it's really, really dark, sometimes it's really hard to see where people's feet are. So sometimes I will tend to cut off feet just because I can't see, like if it's getting darker at night or something like that. Sometimes you got to watch for the arms and the fingers when the fingers are in shot, and if you kind of cut off the fingers in the wrong spot, it's going to look a little weird. So that's, you know, if you're photographing your family or self, but I don't know if you guys photograph humans professionally or not, but I know most of my tribe here is we're all birders and stuff like that. But those would be things that you want to think about. So those are just some other common mistakes that are made, especially when you're a newbie. And don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself some grace, because it takes years to really hone in on your skills, and you're always going to be honing in on your skills, because if you're not constantly trying to learn, that's just not a good thing, right? I kind of look at it this way, you know, that the day I start learning is going to be the day I stop learning is going to be the day I'm dead, right? So as long as I'm alive, I'm always going to continue to try to grow and make myself to be a better person, and continue to do better with my skill and my craft and everything. So anyways, guys, if you guys found value in this and you think this was cool and this was going to help somebody out, you know, give me a thumbs up so that way YouTube goes ahead and pushes this content. If you think some of these things can help somebody else, hey, share it to somebody so that way we can help more people with their photography skills. Guys, I believe in you. I know that you guys can do this. So remember that you are awesome. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you later, alligator.